Okay, so in this lesson, we're going to be reviewing the idea of factoring quadratic polynomials. In this case, they'll be trinomials. And we're going to use this using trial and error or reverse FOIL. Now, before we begin, let's kind of talk about the FOIL method. So when you use a FOIL method in the previous course, you basically were multiplying two binomials. So let's suppose we had 2x minus 3 times 3x minus 5. So you're multiplying two binomials, so we can use the FOIL method. And so remember, F stands for first, which means the first terms of each binomial. So 2x times 3x, remember saying 2x times 3x is 6x squared. That's 6x squared. The O stands for the outer, the terms on the outside. So 2x times a negative 5 is a negative 10x. The I stands for the inside terms, so the terms on the inside. So a negative 3 times 3x is a negative 9x. So remember, the F stands for the terms on the first terms of each binomial. O stands for the terms on the outside, so 2x times negative 5 is negative 10x. The I stands for the terms on the inside, and negative 3 times 3x is negative 9x. And L stands for the last term, the product of the last term of each binomial. So negative 3 times a negative 5 is a positive 15. And then you combine like terms, and so you get 6x squared. A negative 10x and a negative 9x is a negative 19x, and then plus 15. And so the next semester, what you did was you factored these trinomials. So basically, you went from this quadratic trinomial to a product of two binomials. So when you factor, you're basically rewriting the polynomial as a product of factors. So my two factors here would be 2x minus 3 is one factor, and then 3x minus 5 is another factor. Now remember, when you factored, you also look for the GCF. Now for our case, the GCF in our problems will be 1. All right. But remember, the first thing you should always do is look for a GCF if it's something other than 1. Okay, so one thing I got to remind you about this is this. So remember, see how the last sign here is positive? Whenever the last sign is positive of your trinomial, whenever the last sign is positive, that's the easy kind. And keep in mind, it's in descending order. So descending order. So we're going from the largest exponent 2, this exponent is 1, to the constant. So it's in descending order. So whenever the last term is positive, that means that these signs in here have to be the same. Because remember, in order to get the last term a positive, that means a negative times a negative is a positive, or a positive, if this was positive, times a positive would be a positive. So the signs should have to be the same. Okay? All right, so let's look at number 1. So number 1, we have x squared plus 11x plus 30. So again, the last sign is positive, just like this, and it's in descending order. So remember the word descending order. So this is in descending order. So we're going from largest exponent 2, this exponent is 1, and then we have our constant. And so remember, our GCF is 1 for all of these, and so we're going to go directly to the two binomials. Now, this is also an easy kind because the squared term, the x squared term, has a coefficient of 1. All right, so when you factor, remember the first thing you did, or one of the things that you tried, was using trial and error, sometimes called reverse FOIL. So when I look at this, when I look at the FOIL method, we're going to look at the F first. We're going to look at F first. So remember, to get F, you said what factor times what factor will give me x squared. Will give me that first term. So there's only one possibility, x times x. All right, now the last sign is positive, so that means these signs in here have to be the same. And it's always going to be this middle sign. So we know right away that I would have to say x plus, okay? And remember, in the end, you're going to check this. So if you're not sure right now, then just keep on going, and we'll check it in the end. Okay, once you get the once you get the first terms in place, the first factors, then let's go to the last. So what number, what factor times what factor will give me 30, a positive 30? Well, there's several possibilities for 30. There's 10 times 3, there's 15 times 2, there's 30 times 1, there's 6 times 5, and so on. Okay? So what you want to try are the factors that are close together in the number line. So for example, if you look at 10 and 3, 15 and 2, 30 and 1, 6 and 5, 6 and 5 are close together. So let's try that first. If it doesn't always work, but let's always try that first. So we're going to say 6 and 5. Doesn't matter where you put the 6 or the 5. In trial and error, if that doesn't work, we'll switch them and then try something else. Okay, now notice when you get to that point, you don't stop there because you still have to check the outer and the inner. Always make sure you do all 4 parts of the FOIL method. So let's check the outer and the inner. So when I do the outer, x times a positive 5 is 5x. The inner, 6 times a positive x is 6x. And when I add them up, I do get 11x. Okay? All right, so there's your answer. So basically what we said was this. We said x squared plus 11x plus 30 is going to equal x plus 6 times x plus 5. All right, number 2. All right, number 2, let's suppose we had x squared minus 12x plus 27. Okay, so x squared minus 12x plus 27. All right, so again, this is the easy kind to factor because first of all, the x squared term has a coefficient of 1 and the last term is positive. So that means that when I factor this, and always keep in mind the GCF is 1 here. So the greatest common factor of all 3 terms is 1. So we're going to use reverse fault. We're going to use trial and error. So let's do the F first. So what times what is x squared? Well, x times x is only one possibility. Last sign is positive. That means these signs in here are the same. So either they're both negative or they're both positive. Well, they're going to be both negative because it's always going to be this middle sign that you're going to use. Because a negative times a negative is a positive. And when you look at the outer and the inner, they're both going to be negative. So a negative plus a negative is a negative. All right, now let's go to the last. You want 2 factors to have a product of 27. So let's see, there's 9 times 3. There's, let's say 9 times 3, 27 times 1. That's about it, right? So let's try 9 and 3. 9 and 3. And so when I try 9 and 3, we'll put the 9 here, 3 there. Doesn't matter the order in which you put it. If it doesn't work, we'll switch them around. Okay, now when you get to that point, you don't stop there. Always check all 4 parts here. So x times x is x squared. Let's go to the last. A negative 9 times a negative 3 is a positive 27. Now let's check the outer and the inner. The outer, x times negative 3 is a negative 3x. The inner, negative 9 times x is a negative 9x. And when I add them up, I do get a negative 12x. Okay, so what I found is this. X squared minus 12x plus 27 is factored as x minus 9 times x minus 3. So that's your answer. So you factored this trinomial. So remember, when you factor, you're writing it as a product of factors. So in this case, there are 2 factors as x minus 9, and the other factor is x minus 3. Now again, it didn't matter if you put the 3 first or the 9 in this spot. Doesn't matter because remember, multiplication is commutative. The order in which you multiply does not matter. So x minus 9 times x minus 3 is the same as x minus 3 times x minus 9. All right, let's look at number 3. Okay, number 3, let's suppose we had this, number 3. We had y squared minus 3y minus 10. Okay, now notice this time the last sign's negative. The last sign's negative. So let's kind of review something that is going to help us with this. Suppose I wanted to multiply these two binomials, 2x minus 5 times, let's say, x plus 4. Okay? And so when I use the FOIL method to multiply this out, I'm going to get 2x times x is 2x squared. The outer 2x times 4 is 8x. The inner negative 5 times x is a negative 5x. And then the last, a negative 5 times a positive 4 is a negative 20. And when I combine like terms, I'm going to get 2x squared, and then 8x and a negative 5x is a positive 3x, and then minus 20. Okay, now, the point I'm making is this. See how the last sign's negative? And keep in mind this is in descending order, and the last sign's negative. Notice that in order to get the last term to be negative, these signs in here have to be different. So one has to be negative, the other one has to be positive. Okay? So that's a little bit more challenging than if the last sign was positive. That's the easy kind of last sign's positive. Okay, now this time my last sign's negative. All right, so let's kind of factor this. Okay, so remember we're going to use reverse FOIL to do this. And so the y squared term has a coefficient of 1. That's the easy kind. The only way you can get a y squared is if you have y times y. Okay, now let's deal with the signs at the end. Okay, so let's talk about, because I know that one's going to be negative, one's going to be positive. All right, so the best way to do this is what I'm about to do. All right, just look at 10 for right now. We know this is negative 10, but let's just look at it in terms of 10. All right, so the possibility for 10 would be 5 times 2, 10 times 1. All right, let's try 5 and 2 first. So let's put the 5 here, the 2 here. Okay, now we know that one has to be positive, the other one has to be negative. So either this will be positive or this would be negative. What I would do first is this. I would look at the outer first. So the outside is 2y and the inside is 5y. So the outer is 2y, the inner is 5y. Now since the last sign's negative, that means one of these has to be positive and the other one has to be negative. And so when you add them, when you subtract them, so basically you'll be subtracting this. So first of all, when you subtract, 5y minus 2y is 3y, which is what I want. See that 3y? So 5y minus 2y is 3y, which is what I want. But in order to get a negative, that means the larger of these coefficients, the larger of these factors or terms, I should say, let's say terms, the larger of these terms would have to be negative. So 5y is larger than 2y. So this has to be negative, this has to be positive, which makes this a negative 3y. Okay, which is what I wanted. All right, so now all we got to do is just put the signs. So remember, I wanted this to be negative 5y, which means now that this has to be subtraction. And then this has to be a positive 2y, which means this has to be addition. Okay, so always check. Y times y is y squared. Always make sure you go through the process. Y times y is y squared. The outer is a positive 2y. The inner is a negative 5y. And when you combine like terms, you get negative 3y, which is what you wanted. And then the last, a negative 5 times a positive 2 is a negative 10. So that means that y squared minus 3y minus 10 is going to equal y minus 5 times y plus 2. And again, you could have said y plus 2 times y minus 5. The order in which you multiply does not matter. Okay, let's look at number 4. Suppose number 4 we had x squared minus 2x minus 24. So again, now we have another problem where we have the last term being negative. Now this is the easy kind also because x squared here has a coefficient of 1. All right, so let's just go ahead and kind of put some numbers in there and see what works. All right, so we can do reverse FOIL. So let's do the f first. So what times what is x squared? So number one possibility, x times x. All right, now remember this is a negative, so it means that the signs in here are going to be different. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. So let's just deal with that at the end. So let's look at 24 first. So 24. So the two factors whose product is 24 will be 24 times 1, 12 times 2, 6 times 4, 8 times 3, and that should be about it, I think. All right, so let's try the numbers close together in the number line. So let's try 6 and 4. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else. Okay, so we're going to try 6 and 4. So let's put 6 here, 4 here. All right, now let's deal with the sign. So I know that one has to be positive, one has to be negative. So let's make sure, first of all, that 6 and 4 are correct. So let's do the outer and the inner. So the outer is 4x, the inner is 6x. Now remember, the last sign is negative, so we're going to subtract these. So 6x minus 4x is 2x, which is what you wanted. So that's going to work. So these are correct. So all these terms here are correct. I just got to go back and figure out which one's negative, which one's positive. Well, remember, the larger, 6x is larger than 4x, the larger will be the middle sign. So I need 6x to be negative and 4x to be positive, because that's the only way when I add these now, a negative 6x and a positive 4x is a negative 2x, and that's what you wanted. And so now that means that in order for this term here to be negative 6x, this has to be subtraction. And in order for this term here to be a positive 4x, this has to be an addition symbol. Okay? So, again, before you go on, always make sure you FOIL this thing out to make sure you get this. So x times x, the first is x squared. The outer, x times 4 is 4x. The inner, negative 6 times x is a negative 6x. And when I combine them, I get a negative 2x, and then a negative 6 times a positive 4 is a negative 24. Okay, so that's going to work. Now, you're not always going to, let me just say this, you're not always going to get the correct terms right away. So, for example, someone else could have said 8 and 3. All right, well, let's suppose you said 8 and 3. We'll go ahead and rewrite this over. And let's suppose you said x, 8, 3. All right, now here's what you would do. Just like we've been doing. So x times x is x squared. 8 times 3 is 24. Now let's see if it works. Let's see if 8 and 3 are the ones I'm going to use. The outer is 3x. The inner is 8x. All right, now remember, the last sign's negative. That means these signs are going to be different. So what I would do first, what I would do then is subtract these. 8x minus 3x is 5x, which is not what I wanted. I wanted 2x. So I know right away that this would not work. All right, so that's that trial and error idea. All right, let's see number 5. So number 5, we have 2x squared plus 7x minus 15. 2x squared plus 7x minus 15. Again, the GCF in all of these are 1s, so we don't have to worry about factoring anything out of here. Okay, so we're going to go directly to the two binomials, and we're going to use reverse FOIL. All right, now, and it's also in descending order. Make sure it's in descending order. It does help if it's in descending order. Now this time, notice the coefficient of x squared is no longer 1, it's 2. But this is the easy kind as well, because 2 is a prime number. So that means that when I look at f, two factors is product of 2x squared, there's only one possibility, 2x and x. Okay? So I know that's the only ones that would work, 2x and x. Now let's go to 15. I notice the last sign's negative, so that means these signs are going to be different. So what I would do is deal with the signs at the end. Let's do 15 first. So let's talk about 15. So that's going to be the last. I want two terms whose product is 15. So there's 5 times 3, and there's 15 times 1. So let's try 5 and 3 first. Let's try 5 and 3. So let's put the 5 here and the 3 there and see if that works. So here's the idea of trial and error. Okay, so if you look at the outer, that's 10x. The inner, that's 5x. All right, now remember, you're going to be subtracting because the last sign's negative, so one's positive, one's negative. One's going to be positive, one's going to be negative. So to subtract those, though, 10x minus 5x is 5x, which is not what you wanted. You wanted 7x. So I know that this is not going to work. So we're going to try something else. Hence the idea of trial and error. So we get 2x and x. So I know that that's the only possibility for 2x squared was 2x and x. So I know I'm going to have to leave those as they are. Now, remember, we're going to try 5 and 3. So remember how we put 5 in the first binomial and 3 in the second? Let's switch these. So let's put 3 here, 5 here. Now let's do the outer and the inner again. So the outer is now 10x. The inner is 3x. And when I subtract those, I get 7x, which is what you wanted. Now let's deal with the sign. So remember the larger 10x will take the middle sign. So in order to get a 7x, that means that 10x has to be a positive and 3x has to be a negative in order for me to get a positive 7x. In order to get a 10x here, see the outer is 10x. In order to get a positive 10x, that means that this can be a plus symbol. And in order to get a, remember this was a negative 3x. In order to get a negative 3x, this has to be negative. And again, before you go 1, always follow this out. 2x times x is 2x squared. The outer, 2x times a positive 5 is a positive 10x. The inner, a negative 3x times x is a negative 3x. And when you add them up, you get 7x. And then a negative 3 times a positive 5 is a negative 15. So 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 is factored as 2x minus 3 times x plus 5. And again, it did not matter whether you said x plus 5 times 2x minus 3. It does not matter. Okay, number 6. All right, number 6, let's suppose we had 2x squared minus x minus 10. So 2x squared minus x minus 10. So again, notice it's in descending order. Again, in this situation, the last sign's negative. That means that when I factor these, the signs are going to be different. All right, so let's go directly to factoring. So we're going to use reverse FOIL. We do f first. So what times what is 2x squared? Remember, x squared, the coefficient is 2, which is a prime number. I'm using the word prime. So it means that since 2 is prime, the only factors of 2 will be 2 and 1. 2 and 1. So let's put 2x and x. All right, let's go to the last. So the last term is negative 10, but let's just deal with the signs at the end since the last sign's negative. So let's look at 10. The factors of 10, so remember I want to find two numbers or two factors whose product is 10. Well, that's 5 times 2 and then 10 times 1. So let's try 5 and 2 first. Okay, so let's put 2 here and 5 here. Now, and the reason I'm doing that is to show you something. So if this was, let's say, plus and this was minus, do you see right here you could factor out a 2? This would be 2 times x plus 1. Because when you distribute 2 times x is 2x, 2 times 1 is 2. That means that since I could factor out a 2, that means that the GCF here would be 2. And remember, the GCF is 1. So basically what I'm saying is that sometimes it's helpful to look at what you have to make things easier yourself. So for example, let's go back. 2 cannot go here. Because if 2 is here, that means I could factor out a 2, which means that all these terms are divisible by 2, and they're not, because this is a negative 1. Negative 1 is not divisible by 2. So that means that 2 would have to go here, and 5 would have to go here. All right? Now, before we do the signs, let's make sure this is our correct order. So let's look at the outer. So the outer is 4x. The inner is 5x. And remember, the signs have to be different. So that means that one here is positive, one here is negative. So basically we'll be subtracting these two right here. So 5x minus 4x is x, which is what I wanted. But I want a negative x. So in order to get a negative x, that means 5x has to be negative and 4x has to be positive in order for these two to add up to be a negative x. And now we know that since I did get my middle term, the order in which I have these is correct. So in order to get a negative 5x, though, this has to be negative. In order for me to get a positive 4x, this has to be positive. All right, now again, before you say this is correct, always verify. Multiply this out using FOIL. 2x times x is 2x squared. The outer 2x times a positive 2 is a positive 4x. The inner a negative 5 times x is negative 5x. When I combine these, I get a negative x, which is what you wanted. And then a negative 5 times a positive 2 is a negative 10. So 2x squared minus x minus 10 is going to equal 2x minus 5 times x plus 2. All right, number 7. All right, number 7, suppose we had 6x squared minus 5x minus 6. 6x squared minus 5x minus 6. All right, so I have another term where the last term's negative. All right, and again, the GCF is 1. The greatest common factor of all these three terms is 1. So let's go directly to the two binomials. Okay, now, this time, if you look at x squared, 6 is not a prime number. So there are several possibilities for 6. There's, if you look at 6x squared, there's 3x times 2x, and there's 6x times x. So always try first. It doesn't always work, but always try first to use the factors in which the coefficients are close together the number line. So 3 and 2 are closer together than 6 and 1. Let's try 3x and 2x. Let's put 3x here, 2x here. So remember, we're using the reverse FOIL. So for the f, I'm going to try 3x times 2x. It's 6x squared. Okay, now let's try 6 here. For 6, for this 6 here, again, for this 6, we're going to try 3 times 2, 6 times 1. So let's try 3 and 2 first. Now remember our discussion about the earlier one here. When we did the 5 and the 2, we knew that 2 could not go here because that would mean that I could factor out a 2, which meant that the GCF here was a 2, and it's not. All these terms are not divisible by 2. This is 10 is divisible by 2, but negative 1's not. Okay, so positive 2 is divisible by 2, negative 10 is divisible by 2, but negative 1 is not. So notice that GCF is 1 here. So I know that I cannot put a 3 here and a 2 here. Because if I put a 3 here, I could factor out a 3. If I put a 2 here, I could factor out a 2. Which would mean that if I factor out a 3, all these terms are divisible by 3, and it's not because negative 5 is not divisible by 3. So that means that if I'm going to use 3 and 2 first, that means I'm going to have to put the 2 here and the 3 here. All right, now let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. Remember, the last sign's negative, so that means the signs in here have to be different. All right, so we have the outer is 9x, the inner is 4x, and when I subtract those, I'm subtracting because the sign's going to be different. So when I subtract those, I get 5x, which is what you want. But I want a negative 5x, though. So I get a negative 5x, the larger of these has to be that middle sign. So that means this has to be negative, 9x has to be negative, and 4x has to be positive in order for me to get 4x and a negative 9x to be a negative 5x, which is what you wanted. All right, now let's do the signs. Remember, the inner was positive 4x. In order to get a positive 4x, this means this has to be an addition symbol. And in order for this to be a negative 9x, that means that 3x times a negative 3 has to be a negative 9x. Okay? All right, so before you go on, always verify. Use the FOIL method. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. The outer is a negative 9x. The inner is a positive 4x. and when you add them up, you get a negative 9x, and then a positive 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. So that means that 6x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 3x plus 2 times 2x minus 3. Okay, number 8. All right, number 8, suppose we had 8x squared minus 14x plus 3. All right, so we have this quadratic trinomial. It's in descending order. This is the easy kind in a sense because the last sign's positive. All right, now the coefficient of x squared, though, is 8, which is not prime. And there are several possibilities for 8x squared. There's 8x times x, and there's 4x times 2x. So let's try this first. Let's try the ones in which the coefficients are closer together on the number line. All right, so we're going to try 4x and 2x. All right, now the last sign's positive. So whenever the last sign's positive, you can right away go ahead and put in your signs. So the last sign's positive, that means that the signs have to be the same, and they're going to be the middle sign. So they're both going to be negative. And 3 is a prime number. So the only way to get a product of 3 is by saying 3 times 1. And so let's put the 3 here and the 1 there and see if it works. Okay, so don't go any further until you check the FOIL method. So 4x times 2x is 8x squared. Now let's do the outer and inner. The outer is a negative 4x. The inner, a negative 3 times 2x is a negative 6x. And a negative 6x and a negative 4x, when you combine those, is a negative 10x, which is not what you wanted. So this is not correct. So that's why it's always important that you check. Even though a negative 3 times a negative 1 is a positive 3, the outer and inner don't work. All right, well, let's switch the 3 and the 1 and see if that's going to work. So we're going to keep the 4x in the first spot and the 2x here. So we keep the 4x here and the 2x here. All right, we're going to switch those. We're going to put the 1 here and the 3 there and see if that works. So remember, the last sign's positive, so it's right away, since the last sign's positive, you can put in your signs. So they're both negative. All right, now let's check the outer and the inner now. The outer is a negative 12x. The inner is a negative 2x. And when I add them up, I get a negative 14x, which is what you wanted. Okay, so now 8x squared minus 14x plus 3 can be factored as 4x minus 1 times 2x minus 3. All right, number 9. Okay, number 9, let's suppose we had 18x squared plus 27x plus 10. So 18x squared plus 27x plus 10. All right, so I'm going to use trial and error. So this is a little bit more challenging because of the 18. Because if you look at 18x squared, there's several possibilities. There's 9x times 2x. There's 6x times 3x. There's 18x times x. Okay? So again, we're going to try the two that are close together in the number line. So 6 and 3 are closer together than 9 and 2. So let's try that first. Doesn't always work, but let's try. Okay, so the GCF is 1. So we're going to go ahead and say 6x, 3x. Doesn't matter whether you put 3x first or 6x. Does not matter. All right, now the last sign's positive. That means that the signs in here have to be the same, and they're going to be that middle sign. So I know they both have to be addition symbols. Okay, let's talk about 10. For 10, there's only 2 possibilities. There's 5 times 2, 10 times 1. So let's try 5 and 2 first. 5 and 2. So again, remember our discussion. I know that this cannot be a 2 here. So I know that this can be a 2 because if this was a 2, if I put the 2 here, that means I could factor out a 2. Say 6x and 2, I can factor out a 2. 2 times 3x plus 1, which meant that all these are divisible by 2, and 27 is not divisible by 2. So I know that 2 cannot go here. So what that means then is this. That means that 2, remember these were both plus addition symbols. That means that 2 has to go here, and 5 would have to go here. Now again, you got to make sure you do the FOIL method to verify what you have is correct. So even though 6x times 3x is 18x squared, and positive 5 times a positive 2 is a positive 10, you got to make sure that you check the outer and the inner. So the outer 6x times a positive 2 is 12x. The inner, I'm sorry, that was the outer, is 12x. The inner, 5 times 3x is 15x. And when you add them up, when you combine those, 15x and a positive 12x is a positive 27x, which is what you wanted. So this is now correct. So 18x squared plus 27x plus 10 is going to equal 6x plus 5 times 3x plus 2. And again, the order in which you have these does not matter. So you could have said 3x plus 2 times 6x plus 5. All right, and finally, number 10, we're going to do one more. Number 10, suppose we had 10x squared plus 19x minus 15. All right, so we have this trinomial. It's in descending order. The last sign's negative, so that's a little bit more challenging. The coefficient of x squared is not prime, so again, it's more challenging. All right, so let's go and try some factors out. We're going to do trial and error. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. Okay, so remember, we're doing reverse FOIL. So we do the F first. So I want two factors whose product is 10x squared. So let's try 5x and 2x. So 5x times 2x is 10x squared. All right, the last sign's negative, so that means the signs are going to be different. So let's do that at the end. Since the signs are different, we're going to put those in the end. So let's look at 15. For 15, we're doing the last now, 15. So I want two factors whose product is 15. So there's 5 times 3, 15 times 1. So let's try 5 and 3 first. Now remember, for 5 and 3, I cannot put a 5 here. If I put the 5 here, that means I could factor out a 5, which means that all of these are divisible by 5, and 19 is not. So that means I need to put the 3 here and the 5 here. Okay, now let's see if this is correct. To see if that's correct, look at the outer. So the outer is 25x, and the inner is 6x. Now remember, these signs are going to be different. So since they're going to be different, let's go ahead and subtract these. Is 25x subtract 6x going to give me 19x? The answer is yes. All right, now, but I want a positive 19x. In order to get to a positive 19x, this has to be positive, this has to be negative. A negative 6x and a positive 25x has a positive 19x. All right, and so that means then is this. In order to get a negative 6x here, that means that this will have to be negative. And in order to get a positive 25x, that means that this has to be a positive 5. Okay, so before you go 1, always check. 5x times 2x is 10x squared. The outer, 5x times 5 is a 25x. The inner, a negative 3 times 2x is a negative 6x. When I combine those, a negative 6x and a positive 25x is a positive 19x. And then the last, a negative 3 times a positive 5 is a negative 15. So what I have is correct now. So 10x squared plus 19x minus 15 can be factored as 5x minus 3 times 2x plus 5. Okay, so that was a quick review of factoring trinomials from the previous course.